I'm Professor Blank, and today we're going to talk about identifying sources. We're going to look at primary, secondary, and reference sources, talk about what use they have for us, and where you should be using them and where you shouldn't be using them. So what is the difference between primary, secondary, and reference sources? Primary sources are a kind of source that are created during the time of the event that or the topic that you're studying. They are the subject of your research. They are original to that moment. And this might include newspapers, letters, government documents, court documents. It could include artifacts like household objects, or it could include even video. So this is a wide range of things that are created at the time of the topic that you're studying. They are the core of original research. When a historian does their research, you're looking for somebody who has looked at the original sources, who knows what actually happened and has actually read that material from the time. And so this is really where we all focus our work upon. But sometimes, and one thing that I want to note is that sometimes primary sources are reprinted. So they may publish a primary source and then it'll get printed over and over and over again. And even though that happens, historians really want to go back to the basic manuscript, the original manuscript whenever possible, because that will be the purest source that came from that time period. So let's look at a couple of examples. So on this slide, we have Frederick Douglass's journal. You can see that it's printed and probably easy to read. In the middle, you'll see a will. You can see that this is from the 18th century. It's got funny handwriting. And you might think about what use a will would be to you if you're a historian. And the third one is a letter from Abraham Lincoln, where he's angry at some people who are not being good to the United States. And so these could really vary. These could be an ordinary person, like somebody's personal will, could be a president, or could be somebody in between, somebody famous like Frederick Douglass. Now, what are secondary sources? In history, secondary sources are meaningful only when they include original research. So whenever we talk about secondary sources, we are not referring to reference sources. I'll talk about those in a moment. Secondary sources look at the past analytically. They're going to evaluate it and think about it and explain it. And it's going to be based on original research in those primary sources I just talked about. Now, these generally come in a book or academic journal. An academic journal might be the American Historical Quarterly or William and Mary Quarterly. And therefore, when you're thinking about secondary sources, don't think about encyclopedias, don't think about websites, don't think about histories that are written for the general public. These are things that are academic. They'll have footnotes, and they'll be based on original research in the primary sources. So let me show you some books on my shelf. So these are two shelves I have in my personal library at Rowan University. One of them has secondary sources, the other has primary sources. You might notice they're all books, so they look kind of the same. So if you can sort of zoom in on this slide, you might look and try to identify which one you think is primary sources and which one is secondary sources. So if you look on the one on the left, with the shelf that has a lot of books, those are all secondary sources. Those are all books on the history of slavery written by historians based on original research in the primary source documents. The big fat books that are on the right, those are naval documents, documents from the Revolutionary period relating to the navies of the American Navy and the British Navy. And if you see on top, there's a book that goes across the top, and that's records of South Carolina's House of Representatives. So let's look inside a couple of those books. First, we're going to look at a printed primary source. This is the House of Representatives journal that I just talked about. On the left, you can see the sort of cover page where you have the bibliographic information. Always pay attention to that. In your notes, you'll always want to note what those bibliographic information is. But on the right, you can see what we have is we've reprinted the actual words that were on a primary source document, handwritten someplace in an archive. This is probably in the South Carolina Department of Historical Archives. And it makes it easy to read, and you can have an index so that you can find the things you want to read. Here's a secondary source. This is a book. This is Indian Slavery in Colonial America. It's edited by Alan Gallay. Since it's edited, this means that it's a collection of lots of historians writing shorter pieces of chapter length, 30 to 50 pages, about Indian slavery. I have the cover on the left, and on the right we have some examples of what it looks like in the text. And some things you might notice is, I put it on a transition page where you see the front page of one of the chapters and the last page of the second. So you can see there are footnotes on the left side from the chapter before that. And on the right, you can see that there's text and a title, and then you might see footnote markers within that text. Another secondary source that you might use is a journal article. And here we have a journal article from William and Mary Quarterly. Sometimes they're available in paper form, but increasingly you'll look at journal articles online on a database like JSTOR. The third kind of source I want to talk to you about are reference sources. Here I have 3 examples of reference sources. I have Wikipedia, which we all like to use as a way to get information. I have a book form of an encyclopedia. Sometimes these are very specific. This particular journal item is an Encyclopedia of Emancipation and Abolition in the Atlantic World. Or it could even be a website. All of these are written in some form by professionals or are peer-reviewed in some way and are relatively reliable, but none of them should end up in your final source. So let me talk to you a little bit more about reference sources. At the beginning of your research project, you should be using reference sources. I don't care if it's Wikipedia. I know maybe somebody has talked badly about Wikipedia, but when you're beginning your research and you just want to find out the general information, Wikipedia is a fine place to start. Or you can look at some of these more specialized items like I've presented in book form or online. Now, these will give you the who, what, where, and when kind of information so that you know the basic information of the topic, and you can really start to examine it with a basis of knowledge, not a basis of not knowing where you're going. And trying to understand the basic stuff from a book or from a long journal article isn't as easy as it is from a reference source. So get your overall context, develop your questions, get the basic details from your reference source. But then you want to dig deeper with your secondary sources. So let me show you an example of how to do research using all 3 of these sources. Using primary, secondary, and reference sources, this is the basic process you'd use. First, you would start with your reference sources. Find out all you can about your topic, know the when and the where of it, understand the basic story and the context of what you're studying. Then, once you've done that, dig deeper with the secondary sources. Find the question and the specific topic that you are interested in, and find some books that are going to really cover that topic in depth, and read those, and find some journal articles too. Then, once you've done that, look for some primary sources that are going to illuminate and deepen your understanding of the topic and get the first-hand account of what happened in whatever question you're interested in. This will give you the point of view of the past, and with all those sources behind you, you'll have a really deep and broad understanding of your topic and be able to do your research effectively. So, now that I've given you this information, think about it. Do you know the difference between primary, secondary, and reference sources? If so, write it down for yourself. Thank you.